Hello everyone, today we are going to talk about student visas in New Zealand. Welcome back, this is another video for YouTube. My name is David, I'm a New Zealand immigration lawyer and I do these videos, information sessions online, basically to pass out information about New Zealand, visas specifically. And today's topic is student visas. My staff have asked me to talk about processes, procedures. They've given me a whole list of things to discuss and talk about. And I think today the point is I want to try to give a comprehensive outline for you guys, a practical and comprehensive understanding about student visas. I'm going to do this video in two parts. This is part one, so I'll try to give you a foundation of understanding about student visas, things that I think are really important for you to know before you even consider to try to apply to migrate via studies in New Zealand. And then part two, we'll talk about some other details and specific processes and things and some frequently asked questions that we get about student visas. Okay, so let's get into it. So basically, I'm David Fisher. I'm a New Zealand immigration lawyer. I specialize in immigration, and my company, my firm, we deal in all manner of immigration, complex, easy, whatever you can imagine for New Zealand and also for Australia. But in this case specifically, we're talking about New Zealand. Immigration chambers and our law firm Halliwells and Fisher Foley, we manage a whole. Number one that you should be doing is that you should be doing your homework. Now, it's very often, very common that we hear people decide first that they want to study abroad, and they don't necessarily choose New Zealand first. They might just go to some local agent and say, I want to study overseas, or my family member wants to study overseas, what can I do? And the agents will recommend this course and this country, that country, whether it's New Zealand, Canada, Australia. And so sometimes we understand that sometimes New Zealand isn't necessarily your first choice. But once you get to a point where you think that New Zealand is the option to go for and you want to study New Zealand, you really need to do your homework, because there's a big difference between the range of types of courses you can study. Okay, there's university, there's non-university. There are non-universities which have potentially, some people say, have a higher chance of visa decline or lower job chances afterwards, but this is not necessarily true, okay? So I want you to do your homework, really try to understand what it is that this agent or whoever you're talking to is recommending to you. You know, for example, in your case, you may have a bachelor degree already, and you might think, okay, well, you know, naturally I need to go towards a postgraduate or a master's in that same topic area, but this may not be true. Maybe that's not a great option for New Zealand. Maybe there's going to be a different angle to take which suits your personal circumstances. This sort of ties into something that I say all the time, which is get some proper advice. Talk to a lawyer, talk to an advisor, talk to an agent, family, friends, get a lot of information together to try to understand the full picture. So this is the first thing you should be doing, is trying to understand a full picture. In other words, do not just trust somebody who's selling you a course, okay? Do your own homework. It's, you know, a little thing called do your own research, which is really, really important. Do not just trust the person you're talking with. That's the first thing I would mention. Now, in line with that, you know, an example of why it's really important to do your own research and find something that suits you is that we've got somebody that we've helped who recently, you know, was praising of our assistance, because what happened was she wanted to get into an office environment for a long-term pathway towards working in an office, a professional office. And so what happened was she ended up with a course that we could find where it's a master's or MBA program which is taught purely on the weekends. And so the only classes she had to attend were weekend online classes pretty much. And that left her to have the entire 5-day working week available to use that 25 hours of working rights to then take up employment in an office and gain experience in New Zealand. Whereas if that person had gone with a full university program, the timetable for classes changes every semester, and you're likely to have to attend courses and classes during the weekdays with your weekends available for work. And where can you work on the weekends? Hospitality, retail, and these things don't lead towards a professional career. So these are some really key things to think about. Research your courses thoroughly. Look at the outcomes, look at the NZQA level of the course, what are you going to achieve? Look at the industry relevance, the industry that you want to be in. Is the course actually relevant to the industry that you want to go in? check whether the course logically aligns with your goals, and look at job prospects with your work rights related to the study. So the next thing I want to talk about is what I mentioned before, which is related to this idea of who's giving you the advice. Okay, so if you're torn between different courses or different pathways and you're just not sure what to do, maybe you're talking with family, maybe you've got an agent in your home country who's recommending the courses and you're just lost, you don't know what to do, I would strongly recommend that you find somebody onshore. Now, this is where I would say, hey, call me, okay, but it doesn't have to be me. It can be any specialist lawyer or immigration advisor who's onshore in New Zealand, and pay them for a consultation. And the reason I say pay them is not because I'm greedy and I want your money, but this is just because this is the job we do. We charge our fees for our services. Often offshore agents do not charge you any money. Now, this is fine because it's a service they're providing and they get paid by the schools that they recommend you for. But just keep in mind that if you're not paying them, it means that you are the product. They are selling you and your profile to the school, and they get paid by the school. So I'm not suggesting that every agent is a person of poor moral character, but the reality is that they often would rather send you to a course that gives them the best commission, or even just that they would send you to the courses that they have the relationships with. Whereas if you contact directly and pay for a consultation with a lawyer or advisor who's in New Zealand, that person has no interest in the financial aspect of the course that you provide, that you go for. So they're going to actually just look at your profile and give you honest advice about which one's going to suit your longer term plan, whether course A or course B might align further with the PR pathways. In addition to that, if you talk to someone who's onshore in New Zealand, they're going to have naturally more insight into the local labour market. The local New Zealand labour market changes over time. It changes reasonably quickly because we're a small country. And so for example, if you came to me 2 years ago and said, I'm thinking of studying civil engineering, I would say, hey, this is good because there are loads of graduate jobs. We are seeing graduates coming out with no experience and being able to apply for residence straight away with a good salary. Whereas if you asked me the same question today, I would say, the construction market is down. There's a little bit of a downturn in the economy with the property market. There's not as much of a recruitment drive for civil engineers or construction workers. And so it might be a little bit more difficult. And so you see, these are insights that somebody only onshore would be able to give you. So that's my next piece of advice. It can help you to avoid wasting money and time and losing potential opportunities if you just talk to the right person at the right time. Number 3, and the third thing that's on my list to talk about in this part 1 of this video, is that now I've mentioned before about warnings for offshore agents and getting your own advice, but if you are using an offshore local agent, which is totally fine, often they actually know a lot about the programs they're recommending to you to study. They can be really good, useful resource. But if you're using an offshore agent, I recommend highly and strongly, in fact this is mandatory, you must review your own application. You must tell them, I want to see every single document that is uploaded to the application and being submitted to immigration before it goes out. If you do not do this, then you are unfortunately at the mercy of whatever level of ethics, morals and principles this agent is using, or professionalism. And it's just the case that offshore agents are allowed to lodge student visa applications for New Zealand without being professionally licensed. And so some of them in some countries have a reputation for just not doing things correctly. Now, even if your agent is doing things correctly and are a business with good moral repute, still occasionally things can get missed, and so it's a really good idea that you double check the application form, the draft application, all of the details and all the documents, just to make sure that everything's correctly noted. Now, the number one main reason for this is that under the New Zealand immigration laws and policy, if false information has been provided with your application, it does not matter whether you provided it, your agent provided it, lawyer, whoever, as long as that information is false or misleading, or if something material has been withheld, your application can be declined summarily and without any concerns being raised or without any due process. And that's bad, because of course, once it's been declined, not only do you have to then look into lodging it again, but when you lodge it again, there's going to be another issue raised, which is, hey, by the way, we know that there was false information in your last application, so please explain. And so this just causes extra hassle and problems for you, okay? In addition to those kinds of warnings, look, we do see sometimes agents, when an issue comes up or something goes wrong, sometimes they say, oh, look, it's out of our hands, we don't know what to do, because they're not lawyers, let's be honest. Sometimes they'll suggest you to withhold certain information and maybe not tell the full truth, or even when things go wrong, they'll suggest to just withdraw the application and give up. And this is not really nice. We like to fight for you if we're working with you, and so these are some things I'd like to warn you about. It's very important that the details of your application are accurate and that no relevant information is omitted. As a further comment in that line, keep a copy of everything too, right? Because if something does go wrong, you want to be able to send everything to us or your lawyer, whoever's helping you. All right, number 4, the next thing on my list to talk about in this part 1 is the specific requirements for a student visa. Now, obviously, I'll preface this by saying if you're working with a professional, that person will assess your personal circumstances and provide you with a detailed, personalized checklist for documents. This is a very important part of the process, but I want to let you know, generally speaking, so that you know what to look out for and what to prepare, the general points to keep in mind when you're applying for a student visa. What are the requirements, what you need to satisfy, what things you need to do to satisfy Immigration New Zealand. So, number 1, financial. Funds. You need to show that you have the funds to support yourself, to pay for the visa, to pay for the studies. And as an example, let's say you're doing a postgraduate program. This might cost somewhere in the tune of 30,000 New Zealand dollars or more. 30,000 New Zealand dollars. And then, of course, if you have to pay for the entire year up front, so you have to show how you're paying for that, or you have to show the fees receipt. And then, of course, you have to have additional funds that are available for your maintenance during that year. So if you're doing a 1-year postgraduate program and the cost of that is 35,000, then you need to have an additional 20,000 New Zealand dollars available to support yourself for that first year. If you're going to do a multiple year course, let's say a bachelor degree, which is going to be 3 years, you need to show that you've paid for or can pay for the first year, and you also need to show a plan for how you're going to pay for future years. Now, one of the ways that you can do this is by way of your savings. You may have assets that you can borrow against or liquidate. You may have family that support you, and there is a thing called a financial undertaking for a student, which means that, let's say it's your parents who are helping you out. Your parents would complete this financial undertaking form, and then they would provide evidence of their funds and their finances. So that's the first thing, is financial. The second thing is that often there's an English language requirement for these visas too, and so it's not only the visa, but it's the course provider who will want to see your English language. You should start preparing, and in New Zealand we accept IELTS. These are the common ones, is IELTS and PTE, the Pearson's test. There are others that are accepted, not as common in New Zealand, TOEFL, Cambridge, right? Mostly people are taking an IELTS test. This is the reasonably straightforward, easy one to do online. PTE is the other one that's gaining in popularity, but you should check and see which test is most appropriate for you. English language is required for the course, and in some cases that would be an application for the visa as well. Number 3. And this is a foundation of any student visa application, is what we call a bona fides assessment. Bona fides essentially means good faith or good intentions. And this in Australia, they call this GTE, genuine temporary entrant. So you need to demonstrate to Immigration New Zealand that you are a genuine student, that you genuinely intend to study. So what this really means in practice is that you have to show how your course that you're proposing to study aligns with your life goals. Now, in a standard case where somebody has finished high school and then they've gone into further studies, perhaps already completed a bachelor degree, and then going on to tertiary studies like a master's. In that kind of standard case, it would be very straightforward if your bachelor's was in mechanical engineering and then you were going to do a master's in, let's say, engineering management or something at a senior level. But we see a lot of cases where things don't necessarily naturally line up. For example, things to look out for are, is there a study gap? Is there a period of time in between when you've completed your previous studies and the proposed studies? Maybe you've taken some time off, to travel the world or do other personal things, or have you worked? And these gaps need to be explained. I'll give you an example of a case we had approved recently, where this was a woman who had completed a bachelor degree some 25 years ago, 25 years earlier, and then she had children, she got married, and of course now the children are grown up, and graduated themselves and gone off to university themselves. And so finally this woman had decided, well, I've been a housewife, now I need to consider what I will do for the rest of my life. I want to go back to the workforce and I want to develop my career. And so even though the course of study she was planning to do was entirely different to what she had done in the past, and even though she had this decades-long gap, we were able to satisfy Immigration New Zealand that it was genuine and she was a genuine student based on I suppose that story that fits into her life. So the point I'm trying to make here is whether you're a genuine student is not dependent on whether you fit some kind of classical box of what you think a student is. It's whether the immigration officer is going to be satisfied that your story is genuine, okay? We've had people change from studying mathematics at university to then going into, learning about caregiving for elderly people. And because the story made sense and all added up, it worked. But then we have other people who can't really properly explain, what were they doing for those 5 years after they graduated their bachelor's, and it doesn't really make sense. So you see, this is the main thing about the genuine intention to study, right? It's all about whether it's credible and makes sense. Number 4 in these requirements for the student visa is you want to show that you have ties to your home country, right? Because we're trying to satisfy immigration that you're not just trying to use New Zealand as a way to get out and to work and migrate. Now, this is the irony here because, look, let's be honest, a lot of people who apply to study in New Zealand, maybe most, I don't know, have an intention to stay long term. They want to use the studies as a pathway to get a work visa, and the work visa as a pathway to become a resident, residence as a pathway to citizenship. Let's be honest, this is a reality. But it doesn't change the fact that the requirements for a student visa are that you are a genuine student who wants to study, and that you have incentives to return home at the end of your studies, that you have ties to your home country, such that you're not just using New Zealand as a way to get out. What does this usually mean? It usually means demonstrating relationships to your family. In some cases, if you're old enough and you have assets in your own name, your land or home ownership, whether you own any asset makes sense, right? It might just be a car or a scooter, but you have something in your own name. Maybe you have insurance policies, maybe some investments, perhaps even we show some connection to your local sporting clubs or other affiliations. In other words, we want to present to Immigration New Zealand how your life looks back in your home country. And this forms part of the assessment of whether you're a genuine student and whether you have the incentive and ties to your home country. Tied into this, point number 5, which actually, it's here as point number 5 in my list, but I think I've already talked about it, and that is really just, is there a logical study pathway? Does it make sense? So does your intended course of study make sense in the whole scheme of things? I think I've already talked about that. The next point is your previous visa history and travel history, travel records. Okay, so New Zealand is it's an interesting place. It's a unique country in its own right, but it's one of the sort of we call them Western countries. We're not actually in the West. We're in the South Pacific, but it's New Zealand, Australia, is sort of in this group of countries: Canada, USA, UK, and because we're an island with only about 5 million people, and because there's a high demand for people wanting to migrate here and move here, we have to be very careful about who we let in and how we let them in. And one of the things that can satisfy immigration, that you're not going to be a problem in this country, is if we can show that you have previously abided by the laws and rules of another similar country. So if you have, let's say you live in, actually here's a case that I've had recently. We've got someone who lives in Kenya, and this person has never really left that region. They've traveled to 1 or 2 other African countries, but never left that region, but now they're wanting to come to New Zealand. Okay, well, if you don't have a travel history that's outside of your region and in other countries like New Zealand, the immigration officer is going to look at your application and say, why now and why New Zealand? Why haven't you thought about having a holiday somewhere, maybe even South Africa, or you haven't been to Europe, haven't been anywhere? So why do you want to study outside your country, and why New Zealand? What's the real reason going on here? Whereas if that person had, let's say, already had a visitor visa to Japan, maybe they've got family who live in the United States and they've traveled there for a holiday, maybe even they've completed an earlier course or done some studies somewhere in Europe, and at each time they can show that they've traveled there and traveled back and that they've abided by the conditions of their visa. This kind of satisfies Immigration New Zealand of the risk. So that person looks less likely to breach the conditions of their visa and become an overstayer. So that's something to keep in mind, building up a travel history. It's kind of similar to building up a credit history with a bank. If you think about it, if you've never ever borrowed money, never had a credit card, and then suddenly you go to the bank and say, look, I'd like to borrow $1 million to start a business. Well, the bank might say, look, you don't have a credit history, so we don't know what to benchmark this on. Whereas if you start by having a small credit card, and then you start maybe with a vehicle loan, maybe you buy a house, you have a house loan, and then when you go to the bank, they can see that you've been paying your bills and paying your loans. It's all about building a history. Okay, next on my list, and this is something that everybody wants to know about and everybody's keen to be eligible for, and that is a post-study work visa. Now, it's not the case that any course in New Zealand will lead to a post-study work visa. There are rules, there are restrictions. It used to be a lot easier than it is now. It used to be the case that you could study a 1-year, reasonably low-level diploma, and then you'd get a 3-year open visa. Whereas today, the policy is reasonably restrictive, and they're looking at people studying at the higher levels or studying programs that are specifically listed on our short-term skills lists, the green list, etc. And so you want to be very careful that when you're choosing your program, especially if you're using an agent or an education advisor, you want to double check that it's going to be eligible for a post-study work visa if that's your intention. And not only that, but you want to check whether, if you have a partner who you're intending to bring with you, you want to check that the course you're doing would actually lead to your partner being eligible for a work visa to come along with you and to join you for that pathway. Because your post-study work visa depends on not only the level but the type of course, and a lot of courses are not eligible according to that policy. This is something to be really careful about. And also, in addition to that, rules can change and courses come on and off lists occasionally. So be very careful about that. Now, a big warning for the post-study work visa, in addition to checking eligibility, is you only get it once. Again, this is something that used to be the case that you could get a second one if you studied a second or higher course. But under the current rules, you can only get a post-study work visa once. And because of this, you should really choose wisely how you navigate your pathway in New Zealand, because here's an example of a case that we see where people get caught up by this. There are situations where you may actually intend to study in New Zealand towards a bachelor or maybe a diploma, and then you want to go on towards masters afterwards. And you might complete that first qualification and then think to yourself, oh look, I get my 1 year post-study work visa after my postgraduate, so I'll just work for a year, save some money, and then I'll do my master's. Now here's the thing though, a master's could lead to a 3-year post-study work visa, but if you already take that 1 year post-study work visa after a diploma, you're now no longer eligible for the further 3 years that you could get with the master's. So you're going to spend money on a postgraduate 1 year, you're going to work for 1 year, and then you're going to spend money again on a master's, and there's no more work visa at the end of that. So you would have to find an employer who can support you under the accredited employer system, or find a pathway to residence another way. Whereas if you first do that 1 year post-study, postgraduate work visa, postgraduate diploma, and then you go directly to master's, yes, it's going to be costly to do the two courses together, but at the end of the master's, you would then be eligible for a full 3-year post-study work visa. So be very careful about that. It's something to really watch out for. Make sure you choose a study level and a program that maximizes your future pathways. Again, this is why I always recommend to get good advice. Okay. Another tip for making sure that you maximize your future pathway is to check the intake times for your studies. Immigration New Zealand is not going to fast track a visa for you just because your intake is coming up soon. You want to make sure that you time your intake to the right time, because you can't really, you might have to defer a course for an entire semester or half a year, missing out on that time. Making sure that you start early, plan accordingly. This is a really good tip actually, is once you've decided what course you want to go for, strategizing when you will actually apply. We've seen cases of people applying too early and that they just get the application declined and rejected because they say, well, you're not obviously a genuine student because you've applied 6 months before your course starts. But then of course people who apply too late miss out on the intake. So yeah, be careful about that. It's not the case that immigration will process your application faster just because you want them to. All right, so that's the end of my list for part 1 of this video. And I've got part 2 coming, where I'm going to talk about some other tips and hints and the actual process for applying for a visa, and go through some frequently asked questions about them. I'm going to make more and more videos this year as we go, so if anyone watching this has a particular topic they want me to talk about, please put that in the comments. We try to answer all the comments as best as we can. Follow us on the other platforms, TikTok, Instagram, all of that. We're doing updates all the time. And as usual, my advice is to get advice, and good luck with your application.